Ray, welcome to the Coach's Journey podcast.
I've been looking forward to this for a long time, Robbie. I'm really pleased to be here.
Yeah, it's really nice to have you here. I was just saying to you that I've been in your world a little bit for the last few days, particularly as I've been in your book, Life Without a Tie, which we'll talk about more as we go on, and which I embarrassingly recently, just before this call, realized is a play on words. I have a bit of a track record of this. I had another guest on the show and just realized that her podcast has got a great name that was a play on words that I hadn't got. But Life Without a Tie, lovely, and we'll talk more about why that's a play on words and that kind of thing later. And but yeah, and we've spoken on the phone before, and we first connected when I was a guest on the Better, Bolder, Braver podcast, which people should definitely check out. They're doing great work, and Frances I've spoken to a few times, and she always says really nice things about me, so I really like her because of that, obviously, and think everyone should listen to her.
Right.
And so we can put a link to that in, and we connected after that, and it's really exciting to have you here. Sometimes on this show we're really like uncovering people's journeys, but you, because of the book, I guess, have been, well, and because of your blogging and various other things, have been really thinking about your journey now for a long time as a journey. Does that feel right?
It does. I mean, I never thought of it that way at the start. And I certainly never, ever would have dreamed of writing a book when I left. And I never had that intention. But interestingly, as I met people on the road and they asked me, what are you doing, Ray? Why are you traveling? And how did it start? And I told them the story. Often they would ask me, well, are you going to write a book about that? Because I'd really like to read it if it comes out. So I just laughed and said, who knows? Who wants to read a book about someone finding themselves? I can't think of anything more boring.
Yeah, I mean, I should say there's a lot of it, Ray, and I haven't haven't read all of it. I've read bits of it, dipped in and out, chosen pieces to read here and there, and it's not boring. That's for sure. Like, it's a really readable, compelling story, particularly for me, for somebody who's really interested in how do people grow, how do they change, what happens in our lives that mean that we take a different route than we might have otherwise taken.
Exactly.
And there's lots of that in there. And there's all kinds of ways we could kind of get into it, and maybe we'll come back to. I'd quite like to come back to the decision about writing the book. But often, and I know this is going to probably take us somewhere into the middle of your story as you see it, maybe not actually. The question that we often start these shows with is, when did you, some of the work you do now is coaching, and some of what you've done over the last, at least decade, maybe more, depending on, you can tell us, but when did you first come across coaching?
Well, in different ways. I mean, when I first came across it, it wasn't really thought of as coaching, let's say. In the early 80s, I was really fascinated about understanding what fundamentally was driving me in my life. And I turned to sort of spiritual education for that, and I didn't know many people in the 1980s who could help me learn about that stuff. It's like looking for a needle in a haystack. Even when I was at school, I remember as a schoolboy sometimes saying to my classmates in the playground stuff, do you ever think about why we're here? And they look at me and go, what do you mean? I say, well, why we were born, what we're here, what's the purpose for our life? They just look sort of bewildered or laughed or something. No one would engage me with that conversation. So there was always a part of me that was kind of fascinated by that. So that goes right back. But then I started working with a group that I met primarily through a self-awareness program I did in the early 80s. And all of those people had done that program. And so we were all very, very interested in how can we use our daily lives to become more self-aware, to become better communicators, to become more authentic, more real. How can we develop personal power, presence, and all those things? And I was in my 20s when I was invited to be a part of this working group. And I thought, wow, what an opportunity. So I really took it, grabbed it. And I learned a lot about coaching because I was on the receiving end of a lot of it. Then when I started my own business in 97, I was in my beginning, I was 37 at that stage. I felt I was ready to start my own company. So I knew the challenge was going to be, how do I bring people on board and coach them and develop them into the management roles and leadership roles that we're going to need. And so I was doing that without even thinking of it as coaching, just to make the business work. But then in 2002, I was I was a recipient of the Daily Telegraph Business Leader of the Year award for the work that I'd done, and it was considered to be a shining example of visionary leadership at the time. And I don't mind saying I think it was. I think I did a really good job. But because of that, and because of the press that followed in the newspapers, people then started calling me directly saying, "Could you coach me? I'm a leader. Yeah, I want to do what you're doing. How do you do that?" And for the first time ever, I thought, "Oh, I've obviously been doing coaching because it's worked." But I never thought of it until then, and that was even before coaching was quite a thing in business. Even it was only really happening in sport, not in the world of business.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? And so when you kind of had some of that. I mean, you had some of it in you. I
Yeah,
love that story about being on the
yeah,
playground. It's like trying
yeah.
to find the spiritual guidance, and you didn't find it in the playground. It sounds like
No,
that wasn't that wasn't
not a
the place, but you
chance.
tried.
Yes.
And then that came with you until you were learning it by doing it. And I think many of us, many people who come to coaching find that it feels a bit like home. It's like, oh, I've been kind of doing this thing the whole time, and
Yeah.
and it sounds like you had some of that. But when you got these requests, and I want to come back in a sec, because everyone who's listening who doesn't know your story will be like, what was the business and what was so special about it that made that visionary leadership happen, and what did you create? We want to come back to that. But first, with the people that came to you saying, will you coach me? Can you help me do what I do? What did you say yes? What did you do with them? How did you support them?
Well, I wasn't sure because I was still the CEO of an operating company, so I couldn't see myself stopping that. But what happened 6 months after sort of shook everything because my business partner, who was the woman I was married to, who'd helped me build that business from the day one, we built it together. I feel like we were the business equivalent of a kind of, that's an old reference, but I always think of Torvill and Dean, the ice skaters. But we came together to build this beautiful thing, and we did. And we did. What was brilliant about our partnership was that we were yin and yang. Like I did the sales and contracting and the winning of the clients and the vision of the business and all that. And Charlotte led the team that delivered against the commitments we made in the projects and made sure we delivered what we said in the contract, and we always exceeded, where we could. So it was a brilliant combination because we didn't overlap or tread on each other's toes because neither of us knew each other's side of it. And so when she announced, quite shockingly, one day, 6 months after I won that Business Leader of the Year award, I'm leaving you and I'm leaving the company. It was like, I thought it was a joke. Honestly, when she first told me, I really couldn't get it. It was like she must have been talking to someone else. But it did land, and I realized then that what I defined in my own terms as success wasn't actually what I really knew what success was meant to be. And I'd sort of been followed a measure of success that didn't actually, I didn't really place any real authority in myself. And that was a shockingly awakening moment when that happened. And that's the point where I thought that these people were still coming to me asking for one-to-one coaching. And then I started to think, actually, I might move in that direction. I'm not sure, but that's what I think I'm probably going to do.
Yeah. And let's rewind then a little bit and talk a bit about the business, the one that led to the award, the one that you ran with Charlotte. So obviously I know some of this from having read that part of the book, but for people who haven't, say a little bit about what the business did, where it came from, and what was it that you created there that was so special, and how did that come about?
Yeah, our mission was to, what I would say, bring humanity to the workplace, but we wanted to do it in a way that could be held to account financially, because I'd had a short period working for a software company that had always sold the software on these 5-year return on investment business cases. And I thought, there's got to be a way of building a 5-year return on investment business case around a coaching program. I know no one's doing it, and then no one knows how to, but surely we got to figure this out, because there must be a way of proving that coaching a team of managers does lift performance, as well as it being great for the culture and for the alignment and the sense of purpose and meaning and all of those things. But that must all add up to better business. Otherwise, who's going to buy that? So that was really what we did. We set up a company that was delivering performance improvement in the business, but through principled and purposeful leadership, and engaging employees fully and motivating them at the heart level. We even called the program Heart and Soul Management Program. And so we innovated these 8 core principles in the program, and we then showed companies how to put it in place. But before we did any of that, we spent 2 or 3 months building a business case with 2 bean counters, accountants from their company. We said, give us all your data on sort of customer service or sales or whatever we were working in the business. And we pulled it apart with a fine tooth comb until we could find where the uplifts in percentages of conversion rates in their process would deliver a massive hit to the bottom line. And then when we were coaching managers as part of the program, we weren't just coaching them to be nice guys. We were coaching them to deliver a 16-week uplift in performance, which we specified in these benchmark tests we did. So you've got to get your conversion from 5% to 11% in 16 weeks. And you've got 16 weeks to coach your people to do it. So it was all brilliant. It's really innovative. And that's why probably one of the reasons I won the award, because it was really innovative and it actually worked.
And it was partly coaching that the company was delivering.
We delivered the training and the coaching and the design of these programs and all the support needed to make these benchmark performance improvements happen.
Yeah, but you were working, and it's like, I love the description of that partnership. You were working pretty much, you weren't doing the delivery. You weren't at that point connecting with the people directly. You were doing the fine tooth comb and selling the stuff and all that kind of thing.
That was the whole thing. That was why I wasn't happy in my life, because I had this mission to work with people to make these amazing shifts in their lives. And I never got to enjoy any of it. It's a bit like, if you like cooking, I financed the restaurant and instructed the builders, but I never actually got to eat in the restaurant. So that was a big part of why I decided to not try and rebuild that life when it fell apart.
So you had that choice because there was that moment. And
because a lot of friends said, right, you've built this really successful machine now. It's kind of like a money printing machine. As long as you keep it going, it will keep producing business. But without Charlotte doing it with me, which was the joy of it, because we were such great, I just didn't energetically feel like I wanted to. I just knew in my heart I didn't want to, even though logically and financially it was such a sensible suggestion. I couldn't imagine doing that with another person.
I think that's one of the interesting things that came across to me reading the book, Ray, is like, there's this, and you talk about it different ways at different times, the underneath, despite lots of other stuff going on, the rational, sensible things to do, there's an inner voice that you would listen to in key moments. And that's one of them, I guess. It's like, it doesn't make any sense on a rational level, because there's a successful business, award-winning business. I mean, yes, to lose an inspirational leader from a big business, we don't know what would have happened. Maybe it wouldn't have worked, right? Because actually maybe it required the 2 of you and all that kind of thing. But that, if somebody wanted successful business, a really good way to get it might be, take that one that's already existing and running and run it.
Exactly.
But that you knew that wasn't the right thing to do.
At that moment in time, it absolutely not. And I'd road tested it. It wasn't because I just felt that way. I'd road tested it because I went to a rival company and I disclosed in confidence to them what was happening with Charlotte and I, and what I saw could be the impact it would have on the business, and invited them to make an offer to merge our business into theirs while it was still, running with clients, etc., etc. And so we had a couple of conversations along those lines, but the offer that was made to us meant that we would have to be tied to a period where we would have to stay for 18 months working together to meet certain targets that would be part of the deal, etc. And when we talked about that, given the state of our marriage and how that we were coming apart and all those things, it just seemed energetically completely unfeasible that we could do that. And so I knew my energy was not going to be right for that. That's how I knew. I mean, because I put it to the actual real test and sort of went down that road.
And so, just to kind of round out a little bit, the company, the marriage coming to bits part of this story for now, maybe we'll come back to it. if you look back at that leadership, because you won an award for leadership of that business, right, as well as
Yes.
the business. I mean, if the
Yeah.
business was
Mainly for the leadership, and
but it was for the leadership. So as a leader, or what was special about what you were doing in that company, and what was special for the people who worked for you?
Oh, so many things. I mean, and I say these things are quite today. They're much more common. I see this kind of stuff being considered and spoken about and implemented in businesses. So now, if I say it now today to you, it won't sound anything particularly impressive because it's kind of gone that way. But this was in the year 2000. This is like 25 years ago. We were talking about creating a vision that everybody had agency in and could align with. Being kind and compassionate to the people working in the company, and focus on them, on developing them into superstars and developing them as talent, and to make sure that was the focus. If they came to the company, they knew that our interest as a guiding leadership team was making them into great people with commercial value and, fulfill lives. And we took this holistic approach to it. So we sort of saw these connections between, creating a sort of family, almost like a family or community atmosphere, and delivering a great service to clients. There was no separation. They were sort of two sides of the same coin as we saw it.
Yeah, and why, like you say that, well, I would say my feeling would be that's talked about a lot, but it's still relatively uncommon to work in a company that can actually pull that off, right? Even 25 years later.
Yeah, but you've got the privilege in a small business when you're the owner of it and you call the shots, if you like. You've got the privilege of getting everyone to kind of willingly and with their whole hearts give their permission for that to be the dynamic in the team until it gets to a certain size, and then you start to have challenges to hold that in place. As I'm seeing that in some small businesses that I know of now. So,
and what was it like? How did you have the inspiration, the creativity, the drive to create that? Where did that come from? How did you even know it was possible?
Yeah, because both Charlotte and I had worked in the same organization before, which was started by the guy who was my spiritual educator. And he'd been my spiritual guide and mentor for like 10 years. And I'd worked for him in some of the commercial businesses he had. And he had a very, to my mind, a beautiful philosophy of building this kind of future with a federation of small businesses, of people that he'd helped to support in their development so they could all step up to own and operate businesses, which he'd have an interest in, but he'd help them do it in a kind of very kind of fair and open way. I don't think the experiment ultimately worked, but at the time it taught me everything I needed to know about. I grew a lot in that organization that I was part of in his organization. And that's where I've seen the principles in action. That's where I've seen it had worked and delivered, transformative results. And that's where Charlotte and I had learned our trade. But we just felt we could take it to another level by talking about it through a slightly more compassionate and softer lens, let's say, because in my experience, those early days, a lot of it had been done with quite hard, like almost like boot camp style military, pressure on people. And it wasn't feeling so good all the time.
So I just want to catch a few things. So you did find did you call it him the spiritual guide? You did find a spiritual guide in the end. And how did you find him? And what, I mean, if you want to share, what was his name and how did that, you said you worked with him at various times.
Yeah, this was a guy called Robert Daubeny. Yeah, I don't know what he does these days. I've lost contact with him, but he started a self-awareness program in the UK called Exegesis. And it was like a 4-day intensive personal development seminar, a bit like I would say the closest thing I'm aware of today that's like it is the Landmark Forum. So you kind of go into a group and in a room for 4 days and do all sorts of work together, and you're really shaking up your reality and you're really examining what all the conditioning you've accumulated in your life has resulted in and how much of it is operating on you without you even realizing it or aware of it, and how often you're in autopilot and how little ownership you take for your own life and how much you blame and hold others, as give excuses for why you're not doing the things you dream of, and all that. It just attacks you. It kind of works on you on every angle. I loved it. I have to say, it really, really served me to do that program. I came out of that with almost a kind of, like a sort of bright light of optimism shining about how life could be that I hadn't had. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was amazing.
And then, I mean, yeah, I love the story. And it just plants the seeds for, I think, clearly you're somebody who has found these opportunities to grow in all kinds of ways across your life. And I love that, the sense of the kind of bright-eyedness coming out of that program. I can kind of remember times like that in my life. And then you stayed connected to him. You worked with him at different times after
because
that.
When I joined, it was just a rag bag of people who'd done this seminar, and we all sort of thought, because I was working, when I did the seminar, I was a sales rep for a printing company in Harleston. That was my daily life. Driving my Ford Cortina to the office, smoking a few cigarettes at my desk in those days, but pretending to make a few sales calls, but not doing very many, and going on a couple of appointments and getting orders for printing. So my life was, not that interesting. It was pretty banal and pretty mediocre. Then I did this seminar. I met all these amazing, fired up, high-wired people. And all of us had the same experience, which was, oh my God, it's so much better being in this space than in those spaces we have to work. What if we could create a workspace like this? We could all then earn our living doing something together and have all this energy and growth and personal development with it. And so we came up with the idea of starting a business together that would enable us all to earn a living. And we've created the first ever telephone marketing agency in Britain. And it was really, really successful as a business venture. It grew very quickly. Client demand was massive. And that spawned then a training company, because clients who came to see our telephone agents communicating on their behalf, which they were paying for, they went, oh my God, could you train our people to communicate like you do? Because you communicate so powerfully and directed and focused and energetically, and it's wonderful. We've got no one in our company that communicates like you guys. So we started a training company, training people in communication skills. Then the clients were going, oh my God, this is brilliant. Could you train our managers to coach people like that? So we started a management training company, and it just grew and grew and grew because it was so leading edge. That was, we were just doing it different to everyone else, and with energy and with purpose and intention and a real mission to change things for real.
I hope you don't mind me saying this. I did not know the bit about the telephone marketing agency, and I don't think that most people would think of, especially perhaps these days, of telemarketing as being a place where this group of kind of awakening, dynamic, relationally educated people would have an impact. On some levels, it makes complete sense, though, doesn't it? But you wouldn't expect the foundations of a training company, the heart and soul training company, right, to be from telemarketing, essentially. So tell me about that. Like, is there anything you could say about that original telephone marketing that?
I was an agent for 2 years myself. And so my day, I was making hundreds of calls a day and thousands a month. That was a beautiful part of Robert's vision. He knew he needed to transform society, which is one of his stated goals. He knew he'd need to create a team of very powerful and influential communicators who could go into society and persuade people to do things differently. So what better way to hone those skills at the front edge than having to persuade people in companies to take sales appointments with IBM or whoever it was at the time we were representing. You needed a lot of energy and focus and persuasion to get those appointments booked for those companies. And you had to develop and hone your communication skills. So we all became terrifically good communicators. For me, that's probably the biggest gift I took from that period, because not only did I sharpen my own communication skills, I also understood the dynamics of how those kinds of conversations are constructed, because I became a script writer for the campaigns, and I saw the actual logic that's applied to the flow of a conversation and how you steer it and how you direct it. And I've used those skills in my life every day since then, even though I'm not in telemarketing, I haven't been for absolutely years. If I've got to plan a call with someone tomorrow, I will be thinking using the same set of tools.
Yeah. Yeah. And in
Yeah.
a way, after you've done that, no wonder when you were running the business with Charlotte, you were successfly selling this thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
like you
Right.
said, you were finely tuned sales machine, persuasion machine
Yeah.
at that point.
Correct. Yeah. So that had been my strength throughout all the businesses I've been involved in. I'd always ended up in the sales area because I would knew how to communicate about something that made people want to buy it. So
Yeah.
I wish I could do as well with my book.
I'm sure you will. Right. I'm absolutely sure you will.
Yeah.
I think it's a really interesting. I've had a client recently who is a senior salesperson. We've talked a lot. He found himself, I think, at one point a little bit surprised at just how good a manager he was.
Yeah.
And I said,
Yeah.
well, I'm not remotely surprised. This wasn't really a coaching
Yeah.
moment. We were just talking. It's like, I'm not really remotely surprised about that because, sales is about connecting with people and understanding how
Right.
they work and understanding what they want and finding ways to help them get what they want. And so, yeah, it's these, sales skills are skills to be used
Yeah.
everywhere.
They're relationship skills, really.
Absolutely.
Because I think, but I don't know if we want to talk about this, but I think the job of selling is really matching needs to what you have. That's it. Like if if someone needs what you have, it's great. But if that person or that company doesn't need the thing that you have, it doesn't matter how skillful you are. There's just not a match. So it's really how you do a lot of that matching, which is there's quite a lot of mechanics to it, I think. But at the end of the day, I think what makes really great salespeople is they just take care of the person in that process of matching, and they do so much they don't need to do. They'll check in with them at home, and they'll just make sure they've got everything they need, and they'll just be very courteous and say, is there anything else I can do for you? I just want to make sure you've got everything you need from me at this moment. That's, I think, where people fall down in current era, is that no one goes that extra mile anymore, it doesn't seem.
Yeah, or actually, like one of the patterns I feel like I see with coaches, for example, is that because for a lot of salespeople, that thing that you've just described kind of got lost or got obscured.
Yeah.
Now people forget that that's what sales is about, or have never experienced it. Because actually, there is another way of selling, which is kind of like, is more like tricking people. Now, I don't think it works in the long term, right? But you can kind of trick people or use influence tricks to. I had a great conversation with somebody on Henrietta Nelson on this podcast, and we were talking about the scarcity kind of trick. If you buy right now, you'll get this amount of money off.
Yeah.
Which may or may not be true. We don't know that in the moment when we're talking, but there's a
natural
psychological move, which is, okay, I want this thing now. And there are ways to do that. But the way you described sales, it doesn't have to be like that. And actually that wonderful idea. And I love, it's an old book, but it's a great book, How to Win Friends and Influence People.
Yeah.
Written by a salesperson. And,
yeah.
You can essentially boil the book. No one who listens to this needs to read that. I'm going to tell you what the book is, right? The book is understand what somebody wants.
Yeah.
Work out how what you want gets them what they want.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't, then, like you say, there's no point having the conversation. But if you can find a way for what you want to get them what they want, then they want what you want. And at that point, it makes complete sense for them to buy from you, because buying from you gets them what they want, and exactly the way you were saying. And that's an act of service.
Right? Yeah, it really is. And that's what's missing, because, I still think if you or I were to go into a shop tomorrow saying, have you got something that can do this? I need to do this thing at home and I need this tool or something. Either the person would go, no, we haven't got that, sorry. And that's the end, conversation's over, which is typically what you'd expect these days. Or someone's going to say, actually, I don't think we do have that, but would you mind if I suggested something else that I think could do the job for you? And I'll show you how it would work. I really think this could actually be a solution for you, and I'd like to help you get that thing done. You'd not stop talking about that person for days, would you?
You'd be delighted when you went home, right?
You would just be kind of going, oh my God, there's an actual real person somewhere out there in retail. But of course, these companies don't do that anymore. I don't know what their business model is, because they obviously feel they don't need to do any of that. So
yeah. And I mean, we could talk about this in lots of ways, probably. But I guess
that's the part of living that I enjoy the most, that connecting.
Yeah.
Really seeing a person have their dream come true, which in that moment might just be buying a hacksaw or something. That could be their dream in that moment. But whatever it is, that's the bit I love of life. That's the juice of life.
Yeah. Yeah. And you must have done that, like I said, we said before, throughout these roles that you had in your business and the ones you worked in before that. And it's interesting that there was a thread of working with people, like almost the whole time, right?
Yeah.
Like
and as an author, that thread continued, because coming back to what you asked me at the beginning, I didn't have any intention of writing a book, but 100 people over 3 years said to me, if you write a book, I'll read it. And then more kept coming and saying the same thing.
Yeah.
Eventually I thought, oh my God, the universe is banging me over the head with a shovel saying, write a book, Ray, write a book. It's literally begging me to do it.
It's like imagine if you're a live person in the shop and people keep saying it coming into your shop. In a way, whatever shop you have, if people keep coming in and saying, have you got a hacksaw?
Right.
In the end, it makes sense to have a hacksaw.
Exactly.
People want the hacksaw, right?
Exactly.
It's like you can serve all these people who are coming in and give them what they want. And
so
maybe there's a bigger thing, but maybe there's bigger universal questions going on for you as the book is being called out of you. But yeah, right, 100 people.
Yeah, that was a lot, and it just kept on happening. And I thought, I'd really like to serve those people and give them what they need, because that's part of the juice of life, and I love doing that. But the problem is, I don't know how to write a book. I've never, ever written a book. I don't know where you even start or what it would be about, what genre or anything. But then as I was having that kind of moment of uncertainty, and I was in Chiang Mai at the time, I saw on Facebook that, guess what? 5-day writers workshop. This bigwig from New York, the publishing business, is coming to Chiang Mai to do this 5-day workshop. And I thought, oh my God, this is too much to be a coincidence. Since I'm in this moment deciding I've got to write a book, I need to be on that program. Well, maybe I do, but I need a confirmation signal that is the right teacher for me for this moment. And I'm big on confirmation signals. I mention it in the book a lot, because I learned about those when I flew airplanes as a pilot. You need a confirmation signal when you're navigating. Otherwise, you could be going to the wrong beacon. So I could come back to that if you want. But so I thought, what is the confirmation signal that would tell me this is the right thing? Because she said, it's 5 days, lots of authors coming, and it's $1,200. And I was a budget traveler. I didn't have $1,200. So I wrote to her. I said, I really like the sound of your training. I feel I'm on a mission to write a story, because people keep asking me, but I have no experience as an author. So I've got 2 questions. If I did your workshop, would I ruin it for everyone else because I'm a complete beginner and you've got real authors coming that have been published, etc.? So am I just too low grade to be on the program? And the second thing is, I can't afford $1,200, so can I do it for $500? And she wrote back and said, no, it's fine. You'd be okay on the program. And yes, you can do it for $500.
There you go. There's your confirmation signal.
There's my confirmation signal.
Let's do it, Rick, because I love this. I didn't know this about beacons and flying until I read it in your book.
Okay.
Yeah. Give us that idea for people who don't know about it. And then maybe let's talk a little bit about how you use and how you think about that idea as you use it in your life as well.
Yeah. Well, I think, first of all, I think we all have this system. It's intuitive and we're probably not fully aware of it. We don't have a name for it, perhaps. But what I'm going to describe is something which will be common, known to everyone. So when you've got to make a decision in life, we often go, how do I make the right decision? We ask our friends, am I doing the right thing? We're looking for a confirmation signal, aren't we, in those conversations? We're looking for someone to go, I can confirm you're doing the right thing. And you want some authority in that confirmation. So in the world of flying, aviation, how it works, and I learned to be a pilot before GPS was existing. So in those days, you had a piece of instrument.
Were you just learning to be a pilot for fun, or is this a?
Yeah, I learned. My brother is a commercial pilot, or he retired recently, but we both loved airplanes since we were young kids, and he became a pilot as his career, and I really wanted to fly airplanes too, so I did it for recreation. Yeah, so I got my license in 1990.
Okay.
And then I used to fly as often as I could afford, really, because it's quite expensive. And so you're in the aircraft, you're on the ground in London, you go, I want to go to Brighton. Now in Brighton at Shoreham Airport, there's a piece of instrumentation on the ground. It's quite big physically. It's about the size of a huge trampoline, maybe bigger. And it's got these metal pins that stick up out of the ground. And this is called a beacon. It's a radio beacon, and it emits a frequency in all directions for about 50 miles around Shoreham. And if you know what that frequency is, because it's written down in a book somewhere so you can find it out, you can tune that frequency into the instrument in your cockpit, and a needle in the cockpit will point towards it. So you fly on the needle down to that beacon. That's how you know the right direction to fly, because obviously there's no road signs in the air and things like that. So you need some kind of navigational aid. So that works perfectly. The only issue is, what if, say the beacon at Shoreham is 127.4, and you tune to 128.4 without knowing it. So now you're flying exactly down the needle accurately, but to a beacon that's in Bournemouth, and you don't know because you inadvertently chose the wrong frequency. So each beacon has a Morse code identifier. That's a unique piece of sound. And so when you tune to Shoreham, you then do a secondary confirmation. You press a button and you hear in your ear this, and that can only be one Morse signal. And if it's not that signal, you've got the wrong beacon. That's your confirmation. So,
and so when you were thinking about that in your life, this example with the writing course, are you just looking for any confirmation signal? It sounded like then you might have sat down and thought, well, what is the confirmation signal I would need in order to make the commitment to do this workshop here?
That's a great question.
How do you think about it?
That's a great question. In some circumstances, I'll just take any signal. Just give me a sign. I'll say that it's the right thing, and then surely something will show up. And then in others, I'll say, I do need a particular confirmation signal, like the example I gave.
Yeah.
But it varies. It depends on the situation or event or the timing of it. Like another story from the book that you might have read, because it's in the early part, was when I got invited to be the lead actor in a play in Australia. And my whole body and energy was going, Ray, this is the thing. You really need to do this. You're being called to do this. However, one of my core values is integrity. And I'd given my commitment to about 4 or 5 clients that I would do some coaching work with them. And I sort of scheduled it. And this offer to be in the play was going to kibosh that. And I thought, should I say yes to the play or not? What's my confirmation signal here? Okay. The confirmation signal is that I go to each one of those people and tell them the story of what's happened and get their full blessing and permission to go off and do the play, and still be willing to have me come back and help them afterwards. And that's what I did. I had conversations with every one of them, told them, and they all said, Ray, if I was in your shoes, I would definitely go and do it. Go and do it. And I got the confirmation signal that way.
And like, just as a little aside, I love that story. I love the story about the play. And but why do you think those people all said that to you? Like, what was it about? Because that seems unusual. Like, as I was reading that in the book, I was thinking, this is a high bar.
Yeah.
It's pretty unlikely. It feels on an intuitive level that 5 people who have had a commitment from you to do this, all feel that. And say, and give you full permission.
I think it's the power of vulnerability is the answer. Brene Brown so beautifully describes this in her work. I made myself completely vulnerable in front of those people. I said, I don't know if I'm doing the right thing. This could be a really bad decision on my part. They knew all the facts. They knew I was separated. They knew I was under financial pressure to pay my mortgage. They knew this play was a special event, and it would, be somehow helping me find a way into the next phase of my life. And I think they saw my vulnerability and just were compassionate. And supportive. I mean, I'd have to ask each person. I don't know what their process was.
Yeah, really interesting.
Yeah.
Ray, I want to do 2 things, because I want to come back to this story about the play. There's so much in it. But first of all, some people who are listening are probably thinking, why did 100 people keep asking this guy to write a book about his story? So on the top level, so that people don't have this kind of wandering in the back of their mind.
Yeah.
What do you think it was about? You could give a high level picture of the story, or what was it that people kept hearing from you that made them think there's a book here that I want to read?
Well, I think because I got asked a lot of questions that are on similar themes, like how come you're traveling for such a long time? Because I got asked this. I've been non-stop traveling for 2 or 3 years.
Yeah.
I think that was uncommon for a lot of people, because most travelers take a gap year for 3 months or a month or something. So
Yeah.
when people met me staying in a hostel or on the road somewhere, and I said, "Oh, I've been traveling for 2 or 3 years." Really? How do you finance that? How do you pay for that? How come? What happened? So then I tell them the story of being a CEO. What, you were a CEO, an award-winning CEO, and you left all that behind? Why? Why?
Yeah.
And so it just started unraveling, and they were going, "Oh, it's like I was just a guy wearing shorts and flip-flops with a backpack. I didn't look anything particular." And when I started saying all these things, I think people were just shocked mostly.
But it is like, yeah, because my bit of traveling was, yeah, like you say, it was like 3 months, and it is the conversation, isn't it, that you can have often. If
Yeah,
you're
and
in a situation
often
like,
you've got all evening at the hostel, nothing
yeah,
else to do. You're having a couple of beers and you're just talking for
and
hours.
it's very meaningful, and you know, because everybody's got a reason to be on the road, or something that started it, because
exactly.
and often they're really they're reasons about what really matters in life, in a good way or a bad way. It was a good thing that happened to me, or a terrible thing that happened to me, and here I am. But there are all kinds of stories, and there are ones for me that stick. The more usual ones were ones a bit like mine, which is, or maybe even a bit younger than I was, kind of like, people in their early 20s on a gap year is kind of probably most common, and then
that was same for me
later on, and that kind
I was
of thing.
the old guy.
And then there are ones that stand out, the unusual ones, or the really meaningful ones. And right, I was an award-winning CEO, and now here I am. I don't know where you are at the time,
wherever
in Thailand,
I was,
on a in a hostel or a bus somewhere.
And they'd say, "So how did you go from what? How did you switch from being an award-winning CEO living in London to being here?" And I say, "Well, it's an interesting question, because unbelievably, I couldn't work out what to do after all of that calamity. But I went to Australia to do an act of service for a sick friend.
But let's catch it right there. Was it your spiritual guide who'd given the advice? There's an amazing piece of advice that you talk about. So I've forgotten his name again. I didn't write it down.
Robert.
So because it's such an interesting take. Robert had said something to you that took you then to Australia?
He didn't say it to me at the time. He'd said it years before.
Yeah.
And I remembered it because it was very powerful. He said, if you ever reach a point of despair and you're totally stuck, it's bleak, you can't see a way out, one of the things you could do is you just go 100% into service of someone else for a while. You just forget about yourself. And actually, I saw this beautiful quote. I've just written it down today because someone reminded me of this in a LinkedIn post yesterday. Humility is not thinking less of yourself. It's thinking of yourself less. It's by Sid Banks, who channeled the 3 principles. I'm going to reference that quote a lot, I think, in the coming months.
Yeah.
And so that was that. I just remembered it at the moment. I didn't know I even did have it in my brain, but I remembered it at the moment when I need it. That's why I think the universe is so powerful, this universal intelligence, because I've found over the years, I remember things I've forgotten I knew until the moment they are absolutely essential to me to know them again. And then they come back. Something triggers it back. And so that's what happened. And so when I was telling these stories as a traveler, I didn't know what to do. I did this act of service, and it resulted in me being the lead actor in a play in a theatre in Australia. They went, "What? You were a lead actor in a play in Australia, having been a CEO and all that, and you went in a play, and then you did." I mean, people were just like flabbergasted to hear this stuff. And that's why they said, "Are you going to write a book about this?" That's when it started.
Yeah,
none of it made sense.
Yeah, I was going to say, unfortunately, we can't, even in a 2-hour lengthy conversation like this, we can't double click on all the great stories that you've got in your book. But let's do a little bit on this one. So, because we've kind of got into it. So you're in Australia and you've been helping a friend. You've been really in service of her, and then you move on to see another friend in another part of Australia.
That's right.
And you're in the theatre.
Yeah.
And then what happens?
It's just the interval at the play we were watching. I can't remember what it's called. And I'm just reading the program to pass the 15 minutes of time. And I noticed my attention is wandering to this box in the corner of one of the pages. And I look at it a couple of times and look away. And I keep wanting to go back to it because it says auditioning for the next play in the theatre is called Out of Order by Ray Cooney. He's an Irish or English playwright, but very well known in Britain. He wrote Run for Your Wife and other farces like this. And it's about an English member of parliament. And I turned to my two friends and just for a joke, completely for a joke, and to pass the time, I said, I should be in that play. I've got the perfect British accent. I'd make the member of parliament part, maybe. And I didn't mean anything by it, but they looked at me and they said, well, actually, that's funny you should say that, because we know the director of the play. Why don't you go to the audition? You'll be here on Sunday, because it was a few days before I left. I said, don't be ridiculous. So I laughed. I said, look, there's going to be real trained actors and people with skill going to those. I don't have any training. I've got no skill. I've never acted before. Besides, I've got to go back and serve these 5 clients who are waiting for me to come back. And I've got a mortgage to pay, and now my ex is gone, and so I'm doing it all on my own. I can't afford it. Blah, blah, blah. I had hundreds of excuses. And I was sort of missing the point. They said, well, why don't you just go to the audition for fun? Don't try and be in the play. Just go. You're going to be here. Just do it for a laugh. I said, that's not a bad idea. I'll do that. I thought, I'm into growth experiences. I'll try anything. So I went to the audition, and because of my training in that community I described earlier, I only knew if you do something, you throw yourself in 100% or nothing. It's 100%. You give it all. So I thought, that's what I'm going to do. And my brother's married to an actress, a professional actress. So I kind of knew a bit about that life and how it works and stuff. So I get given all these different parts to read in the script, and I was doing them pretty well, I think. And at the end of the evening, when the audition's all finished, the director came over to me and he said, can I have a word with you, Ray? I thought, oh God, what have I done? I've lied on my form. I didn't tell him I was living in England or that I was going or anything. I thought there's no point in doing that. He said, so what's your situation then? Are you actually living here, and could you be here for 3 or 4 months? And I knew from the questions that I'd impacted on them, and that they were maybe thinking of offering me a part. I said, yeah, I'm living here. I'm staying at Julie's, and I'm here. I was not going to be there. I thought, I'll just have to tell them when I get home. I couldn't do it. So when I got back to Julie's apartment, I said, I think they're going to offer me a part in the play. But to be honest, if it's just a small part, like the waiter coming on with the tea or something, and then it says it, I'm not coming back. It's got to be one of the 2 lead roles, or I'm not doing it. And they're never going to offer me those. That's not going to happen. And I flew back to Heathrow a couple of days later. And 2 hours after I got home, the phone rang, and it was Julie saying, they want you in the play. I said, what part? She said, they want you to play the part of George Pigden, the main character, the central character. 400 lines in the script. He has to do 2 on-stage kisses. He has to move a dead body. He's the comedic center of the whole thing. I thought, oh my God. And I freaked out. She said, I've given you 24 hours breathing space before you need to reply. I went to Drury Lane and got the script, showed it to my sister-in-law, said, this is the play. This is George's character. You know me. Do you think I could blag my way through this? She said, yeah, I think you could. I could show you how to do it. I think you could get away with that. So I then did the calls to the clients and told them, and then I had a call with the director, just a final check before I left, to say, are you sure that you want to take a risk on me, because you've got 300 or 400 paying customers coming into the theatre every night who are going to expect a professional performance, and I've never acted before, and you know that. And he said, we've got lots of faith in you, Ray. We think you'll be brilliant, and we know you need support, but we're going to help you be ready, and you'll be able to do it. I said, great. And so I booked a ticket back to Australia and went back 2 days later. And I was really successful in the play. It was brilliant. It was just a dream. It was fantastic. For 3 or 4 months, I lived another person's life, because all I had to do was rehearse and get ready, and then do the performances every night and stuff like that. And it was in the papers. I got reviews in the papers. I've still got those. And it was just brilliant. And it was like, it was the thing that I needed. It was so unlikely and out of character for me to do something like that. And it was really it's what gave me the insight that I think a few people might have seen on various online things I've done. It gave me the insight that the Ray the businessman was as much a character as George Pigden was. But Ray the businessman was a character I'd authored unconsciously and over a long period of time, without realizing that I had been making all those little choices that accumulated in me being Ray the businessman. And I had forgotten that, as well as being the actor in my life, which was Ray the businessman, I was the scriptwriter and the director of the show too. I'd forgotten that. And doing the play made me hugely aware of that. It was the big insight that I'd hoped for from going to do the act of service. And when I came back, when I was given that advice, do an act of service and something will breakthrough, something will emerge. I was expecting it to happen on the day I left. It's like, I've done my service. Where's my breakthrough? I'm leaving. I don't have one. But it didn't actually come till about 3 months later. But that was the breakthrough that I needed.
Yeah. And it's such a powerful metaphor, right? It's like there's a character that I've subconsciously created.
Yeah.
I wonder if you could say, if you've thought more about why that happened to you and why it happens to others. Like, where did these characters that we sometimes end up living as without realizing come from?
Yeah.
What are the impacts of them?
Yeah, I mean, it's great because when I got to Australia to start preparing to be George Pigden, I sat down with the director and said, so how does George speak? What's his voice sound like? How does he walk? What clothes does he wear? I've got to become this character, so I need to know everything about him. Now, that process, I think, goes on in our lives from when we're young kids. We hear little conversations between adults we're around going, success in life is this, or getting a good job is the most important thing, or whatever it is. We're just conditioned with all these ideas and beliefs constantly that we're not consciously aware we're absorbing and are going into our files and records and are actually directing our decision making. It's just a completely unconscious process. And so whatever we grow up thinking, in my case, it was, I need to be happy in life. I need to get a good job, get a good wife, get a house, a mortgage and kids, and the car parked outside, and then everything will be sorted. That's what I'd been told. That's what all the voices accumulated had told me. And at no point had I ever questioned that for a second as whether that was the right programming for me or not. I just thought, I'm just following this to the letter, and then discovered as I followed it and reached the end point of that process, oh my God, I've got that life that I followed, but I'm actually really unhappy in it. But obviously I've made a mistake somewhere, or it's not right. It's not what's true for me. It's not who I am. It's not really authentically me. And I felt at that point trapped because all I'd prepared myself for in life was to be in that role. All I knew was being the head of a business like that. I didn't know how to do anything else. And now I was trapped doing it. As much as it was producing fantastic financial life, but I wasn't happy doing it.
Yeah. I mean, there's so much in there, isn't there? It reminds me that, and coaches will have seen this, with clients sometimes it's a remarkably, you can see that we're all actors playing characters, because you can prompt a shift in character. The character that somebody's playing relatively, like, we can do that for us in some ways in a relatively short amount of time. You can imagine, we're capable of imagining the other character. If I was already really confident, what would I do here? If I was my friend who loved public speaking, how would I approach this situation? You can do those kind of mental leaps into a different character. But it also makes me think a little bit that, I had this thought, having thought a bit about that George Pigden insight ahead of the call, that it's almost like it's not a terrible idea as a child to listen to the things that adults say make for success and happiness. Like, you don't know much about the world, and it's not actually it's a pretty smart thing to do. Like, if I don't know much about the world, who are the kind of people that seem wise in the world, and what do they say makes you happy? And then the problem is that the world's a bit more complex than that.
And also the goalposts were moved since our parents gave us that advice as well. So it's so they're giving advice that's already sort of out of date when they're giving it, because new technologies, new ways of working, new ways of thinking, new models for everything, the internet, blah blah blah. Of course, their advice is not completely going to fit, because that's not the world they got theirs in.
Ray, tell me about the number 26,902.
That was the number of days that my dad lived. 26,902. And I don't know why, but when I went to his funeral, he was 73.
Because he died in the middle of this period, right? As things were changing and your life was coming open.
Charlotte told me she wanted to leave. We separated, and that was the time my dad was very ill in hospital and fighting for his life. And it was a tough time for me because I didn't have the loving support of Charlotte. She couldn't, she didn't do a bad thing. She was obviously in her own process. And so I was sort of navigating that potential departure of my dad on my own, at a time when my life was already wrecked from losing my life, and the fall of the company with it. So it was a really challenging time for me. But I don't know why at his funeral I couldn't think of anything else rather than how long his life had been in days. Just I had no idea why that came into my thinking. So I got home after the funeral and I worked it out and I wrote it down on a piece of paper and stuck it on the wall in my kitchen. I just kept looking at it without knowing why I was looking at it. But I was thinking mainly that's not a really long period of time. 26,900 days. That's really short a life. It's a very short thing. I think it was because I was going, what should I do with the rest of my life? That had been my question up to that moment. Now that it's all wrecked, what should I do with the rest of it? How do I shape the rest of my life? Well, I hadn't gone, well, how long exactly is the rest of my life? So that was probably the stepping stone it gave me. I thought, how many days have I got and how many days have I used up? So I did some research on the internet. The government and actuaries track this information very, very accurately with models because it's going to cost them money to pay pensions. So they're very, very aware. And there's a guy actually I came across the other day whose reputation in the world is he can most accurately predict, based on 5 years of health data, the month and year in which a person's going to die. And he's known for that.
Well, that's a bit terrifying. Can you go to his website and put stuff in?
I can't remember his name,
you need to give the health. You need to give
yeah,
the
but
health
you need
records,
with 5 years of data of the type that he described. He's been doing it for years for all the insurance companies. He can predict the month and year a person's going to die, and they're very accurate predictions. So I got this data. In the UK, the average age of mortality for men is 80. So that's 29,200 days. Men, I'm sorry to say this, you've got 29,200 days most likely. Some of you will live longer than that. Some of you will live less than that. But average, it's 29,200 days. Women, it's a bit lot more. I think they have 82 for women. So they've got a couple of years extra. And that meant for me in that moment, I had about 12,500 days of my life left as I sat and worked all these numbers out. So my question subtly changed when I had that data. Literally, data does help with your questions because I went, not what I'm going to do with the rest of my life. What am I going to do in the next 12,500 days? And what's most important for me? Because I could do a lot of different things. So, for example, is building my CV and getting more badges and medals on my CV important? Do I need to do anything of those 12,500 days on that? No way. It wasn't even on the list. What was on the list were things like, I want to see parts of the world I'm not going to see unless I go soon. I want to broaden my mind. I want to find out about the world. I want to actually I felt like I'd lived on a postage stamp on this massive planet my whole life. And I just had no idea what was going on the world I was a member of. I just needed to have this sense that I'd kind of been out there somehow. I didn't know why or how that would look, but I knew I had to go out, away, and explore, because I now know that one of my core values is exploration. I didn't know it at the time, but I've been able to articulate that. And so the journey started to take shape. I thought, well, if I've got 12,500 days left, the first thing we're going to do is go out into the world and gather some new information about what's going on in the world, and then use that to make some new decisions about how to use this time. And that's where it led me.
And so it's like, well, I should say, I don't know if you can see this actually. Let me see what you can see. Again, if people are watching over there, they might not see it. This thing here, this thing.
Yeah, I can only see the frame. I can't see.
There's a frame with, and it's made by Wait But Why, which is the blog of a guy called Tim Urban. And it's got one square for every week of life. If you live to your 90, like the square.
Yeah, no, I've seen that. I think I used that in one of my presentations.
Yeah, it's 52 by 89. So
it's
like
lots of little dots in rows.
Exactly right. And you can.
Yeah, I've used that before. I've seen that.
You can do whatever you like with it, but it's the same reminder really, just weeks instead of days of. And you know, it's funny. People always ask what this is, and then I ask them how old they are and when their birthday is, and we try and find their square. On the picture. And you know, I look at where mine is, and you know, you just get a picture, a much more clear picture of what is life, exactly like you say. Of what, and it partly came, I think, for Tim Urban. We could probably put a link to this in in the show notes wherever people are listening as well. My memory is that I got this my mum got me this as a present after I'd shared a blog of Tim Urban's, and I
Right.
think it was about seeing his parents. So it has a parental connection as well, a bit
Oh,
like your
okay.
son. You know, he
Yeah.
realized, well, okay, if I look at my life as this number of weeks,
Yeah.
how much of my time, the time that I spend with my parents, is already passed. And actually, for almost all of us, you know, after you're 18
Yeah.
or
That's, I
16,
think,
whenever you leave home, like almost all of it is in that period, right?
yeah.
And then if we're lucky, if we want to be spending time with our parents, if we're lucky, we have consistent times after that. But in a
Right.
way, no number of Christmases or weekends away will match that first, 10 years, let
Yeah.
alone the following 6, and then maybe a
Yeah.
few more after that if you're like me and you have like life crises and you end up back at home at different points, a
Right.
bit more. But yeah, that's where it came from. And I guess I wanted to share that because I think it's another person looking at that, the scale of life, and thinking about
Yeah.
using that to think about what's meaningful.
What's meaningful? Yeah.
Is
Yeah.
that, what for you? Because some people see this thing on my wall. People aren't in this office that often, but sometimes people see this thing on my wall and they're like, "Sorry, what is this?"
Yeah. Right.
Have an excellent conversation with an electrician about it. But
Yeah.
some people find the idea of considering our mortality quite strange. But I wonder for you, why is it important to do that? What either generally or for you, and maybe we've already said it and it's just emphasizing something. What made
Yeah.
it
Well,
important to do that?
in that moment, I wasn't even sure why it was important. It was just I was following my intuition. And for me, I think what woke up in me as a result of the collapse of the old life was a sign that kind of access to a sort of inner voice that I'd lost connection with. And it was just speaking to me here and there quietly.
Yeah,
And often
there's a really nice bit, like, what it
yeah,
stood out for me, and I was going to ask you whether it had always been there, and what makes, there's a bit where you're sitting at the kitchen table in the
yeah,
aftermath of the divorce, and
yeah,
the inner voice says, I think I wrote it down because it's so powerful. It said, "It's time to get out of the life you've created. You're
yeah,
done with it. It's time for
yeah,
something new."
correct. And so it was speaking to me, and it was and I was, it was a sort of bittersweet thing because I was unhappy before this phase because I was in a life that wasn't exactly fitting for me, and I'd lost connection with that inner voice. Now I'd sort of lost the physicality and the form of my life. I'd lost, but the voice was coming back. So it was the tragedy of losing the love of my wife and that life and all those things, but the joy of finding that voice again. And these two things were literally balancing out each other, and it was hard to know whether I should be happy or not in those
Yeah,
moments because it
yeah.
was a sort of such a weird mixture.
And I mean, maybe it's the answer is probably always both. But do you think that it was letting go, like losing track of the voice, that had led to the life that was somehow
Yeah.
off track, or had the life somehow got in the way of hearing the voice?
Yeah, I think it's what happens to businesses, to people, to sports teams. When you start obsessing on the measures or the score marks that you're using as your reference points for your own inner success, you shift your attention away from what's truly in you, the feeling of it, to what the measure is. And then you focus, okay, I'm just going to focus on the measure. So getting more clients, increasing the revenue, getting bigger profits every year. I just became focused on that stuff. And I forgot that in what got me to want to do all that was the joy of personal growth and the joy of creating a community. And I forgot that stuff, just literally forgot because my attention shifted, not in a good way, to getting financial results.
Why do you think? Like, I would hazard to guess you're not the only person in the world
Yeah.
that literal thing has happened to. I mean, maybe
Yeah.
it's quite stark because you had such a focus on
Yeah.
making things human,
Yeah.
and it slipped away from that. But why do you think that happens so much? The shift to, I mean, you talk about minimalism in the
Yeah.
book. You talk about
Because
materialism. What is it that in I don't know, modern Britain, that leads to that happening?
yeah, well, it's a great question. I don't know. There'll be thousands of different answers from people, but my answer to it and how it's come to me, how I sort of feel it now, is that what I learned through the teachings I received in the monasteries when I was in Thailand, the Buddhist monasteries, is I learned about the cycle of craving that all human beings are we have. It's just not known to us. You you sort of feel a gap in your happiness and emptiness inside yourself. And so you crave something that you believe is going to fill that gap, whether it's a new job or a new partner or more money or whatever, holiday, different things at different times. But we just want things and crave things we think is going to make us feel whole. So even if we get that thing and we feel whole for a few minutes or a few days, it's going to wear off. It's a temporary cessation, as they call it in Buddhism. And then the clinging starts because you don't want to let go of the happiness you've had for a brief moment. And so the clinging then leads to further craving and wanting to fill the hole again. And we're just literally trapped. All Westerners, all people in the Western mindset are trapped in that cycle. We just don't know it, but that's how it is. And of course, businesses that produce products play on that. They know that too. They know this stuff. And they stoke the flames of your desires because it's more money for them. You think, oh, if I just get a new Rolex, I'm going to be really happy forever. Of course, you get the Rolex, you are happy for a minute or two, but
yeah, and then it's interesting, isn't it? Because then you've got like the newer businesses. The thing is probably less Rolexes and more, if I just watch another episode of this thing, then I can hold on to that feeling. And there's an endless supply of these things, whatever it is.
And I think there's been a big shift in recent years because when I was researching for my book, when I was writing it, I came across a book called Stuffication by James Wallman, which is an excellent read. And he talks about the trend, I think, in the younger generations than me, the millennials and other generations that are 20s and stuff. He said, my generation grew up with values based around materialism. You were taught by your folks. What you own is what denotes your status in society, what you own and accumulate. And there's some truth in that, in our society. But he said younger people, they're not interested in that. They want to know what experiences are available. They want experiences, life experiences. And so he said there's been this shift from materialism to experientialism, that he calls it in the book. And I saw a lot of truth in that because I was backpacking around with a lot of these young kids and talking to them, and I could feel that and sense that in the way they were speaking. They really weren't interested in emulating their parents' model of accumulating loads of stuff that they didn't want.
And what's going to be interesting, I guess, is to find out, and it's interesting, is maybe some people won't like this, but to me, what's going to be interesting is to find out what's the shadow of experientialism.
Yeah.
Right. Like what do you lose if you go too far down that, which undoubtedly many people will have. Maybe that's Netflix. That's the problem with it, that it's like it's an experience, but it's like you actually can just lose yourself for, in some ways, a wonderful 6 hours. I can't anymore because I've got a 2-year-old. But when if you don't have something like that to distract you, great mindfulness belle that she is,
right.
Like you can lose yourself in those things. One of my friends, when he was traveling, said that watching the TV show 24 was like time traveling. You get on a coach across South America and, you just get into 24 and then 19 hours later you arrive on the other side of Chile and, you barely noticed it.
You don't even want to get off the coach because you're halfway through an episode. You don't want to get off till it finishes.
Exactly. So, but I mean, there's so much kind of in there.
Yeah. A lot. I don't know how we got onto this, but
I love it. Right?
I think we started talking about the days, didn't we? So
it's one of my favorite things about this show is that it doesn't matter how we got here because it's interesting to us and to be playing here. I guess as in this moment of like, ooh, why are we here, and thinking about time traveling with 24 and that kind of thing. If I want to just get for people who are listening, because we're not going to cover everything that's in the book, and that's good because this is part of how we sell the book, right? We just talk about some interesting things in it and leave people wanting more. But to give us a picture, 20 something countries, I think. Is it more than that now? You moved around. There's new places that you went. There's new experiences you had. There's landmarks that you saw, people you met. Marathons you ran, all kinds of things in the story.
So just to give people some basic facts about me, I didn't have kids when I was married, and so that enabled me to look at things quite creatively and go, I had the opportunity to take an experiment to untie myself from the normal ties of life.
And let's just catch it. Sorry for people who are completionists. There's the life without a tie. Play on words, right?
Yeah,
no tie anymore. And
it's a bit dated because I came from the era where we did wear ties in business, but um, originally the idea for life without a tie was me removing the necktie from the
Yeah.
business suit. But also, I realized that the four ties that tie all of us to our lives, I characterize as the four ties is our spouse or partner, the home that we actually live in, our careers, and the community of friends and family. Those are the four corners of our tent that
Yeah,
peg our lives down.
it's a really nice model.
Yeah,
Hearing you say it again now, I've read it in the book. Hearing you say it again, it makes me think of the time when I took some 6 months off and did some traveling and did various other things, and it was a time
yeah,
not that dissimilar to yours,
yeah,
albeit a slightly different stage of life, but a time when a bunch of those ties were, a couple of ties were severed,
yeah,
and another one was uncertain enough that I was a bit like you with work, was happy to leave it behind. Like it
yeah.
wasn't a painful thing to sever that tie.
Right.
And so suddenly there's an opportunity to do this kind of adventure. Now, what I love
Yeah,
about there's a really nice foreword to the book by Bernadette Russell, and she says this great
yeah.
thing about how she too set out in despair, but she stayed in her own neighborhood to go on her journey. And I think that's a
Right.
really nice way of thinking about what people can take from a book like this, because of course, you say a really great thing, which I completely agree with, that for the people that are too afraid, want to do something, even a tiny version of what you did. I hope they take from this conversation, from anything they read about you, some of the courage to make those leaps, to do them. But it doesn't have to be, for those who do have children or caring responsibilities or whatever, it doesn't
Yeah.
have to be a leap that involves many countries around the world.
No, it doesn't have to involve any, because I in my coaching work, I see people take huge courage to admit to themselves, I'm in a job which is killing me. I don't get any energy from it. I'm not alive. I'm so outside of my element when I'm doing this job that it's literally killing me. And I need to admit that and find a different job that puts me in my element. That's as big a change on the scale as me going off and doing some traveling and coming back. That's the same. It's no different. It's just different circumstances, but energetically it's got the same power.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
really, not the message that I have for people having done the journey, analyzed it, reflected on it, written the book about it, is you have to make a shift in how you think and perceive the world in your life. That's what's really what it comes down to. Is changing your way of thinking. That's the most critical thing.
But it's also interesting, isn't it? Because each of those, I don't know if this is what you were saying, and because I think I interrupted you,
Yeah,
but each of those four ties,
yeah,
they are both a reason to not, that makes it more difficult to go on a big trip around the world,
yeah,
but they are also like a connection to the kind of person we are, aren't they? They can hold us, and we have to be,
yeah,
I think we have to be really careful about this with the people that we love, right?
yes,
Be really careful that we're not holding them into an identity that isn't, I'm saying this as though this is the thing I've thought about loads. This is the thing I'm
yeah,
thinking in this moment, Ray. We have to be
right,
really careful with the people we love, that we aren't accidentally holding them
yeah,
into a role that
yeah,
is an old role, or is tying them, or is a role. And
yes.
everyone who's
Well, we're all
gone
going to
home to
be,
their parents' house, like ever, has probably felt that you get sucked a little bit into that role. It's quite hard
yeah,
to be.
we've got a cat. We're all playing characters in those
Right.
little cameos. Yeah,
Yeah, but
yeah, we are.
yeah, yeah, the idea of the ties.
Yeah,
Hmm.
it's a subtle thing. It's not. There's no. You can't probably cover it all in a conversation because it's so subtle and so dependent on each person's own life. But it constantly comes up in my coaching work in one form or another. This is a regular thing where I, would say to a person who wants to make a shift, I might say, "Do you have the support of your partner to make that shift?"
No.
And I say, "Oh no, they really think it's a shit idea that I do that." And this is obviously one of the reasons it's not happening.
Yeah, and a great coaching question for anyone listening, right, is when people are resisting, say they want to do something but aren't doing it. It's like, well, what are the
Yeah,
ties?
yeah,
What are the things that are tying you to how things are right now?
yeah. And often, whatever people say, often it's just because they think or believe a certain thing. It's not necessarily an actual, real, tangible. Like if there's a law passed tomorrow that says you can't go do that, if because now there's a law saying you can't.
Yeah,
That's different, but
yeah, but mostly it's not
it's
that at
not. No,
all.
it's not that at all.
And it's funny, actually, just as we're speaking, again, we can put a link in for this. A podcast I was on, I was a guest on, has just come out where I was coached.
Right.
Like I was a client. It's a coaching
Ah,
session
great.
episode of the podcast. And one of the things in it is quite interesting. It's basically and I know what happened because I did it. It's like I had this sense that there was a really strong thing. I had this really strong story in that conversation that about money and what I needed to create and what my speech marks, what my wife needed me to create.
Right.
And during the conversation, I caught that was probably mostly story. And then I was able to confirm that it was mostly story. It's not completely story, right? Of course, I have to contribute. But the pressure I was putting on myself, tying myself to certain ways forward, was much stronger than the actual thing that the person I care about
Yeah.
needed. So
Yeah.
I think it's a really interesting way to think about all of this. Ray, I want to come in a minute. You started to bring it back in, and it feels important to come to coaching again in this conversation. But tell me, you're back in the UK now, right?
I came back in 2019 to, like in the way that Joseph Campbell talks about the hero's journey, which is the arc of every story that we ever read. And Bernadette Russell summed it up beautifully in the forward. She said, Ray brought back the jewels to the village. I knew when I returned to the UK, it was time to get the story down on paper and share it with everyone, because you come back to your former life with this new insight, and the most valuable thing is to then share that with everyone in the community so that they can use the insight you've gained. So that's why I came back in 2019. I spent 2 years really focused on getting the book finished, which was published about 3 months ago.
Yeah. And what was it that, so that was probably, how long were you traveling? I mean, I know there
I
were
was away.
times back in here and all kinds of things in there, but
I left in November 2005
yeah.
and for a 6-month sabbatical, but I finally returned in September of 2019. So
do you think it is a final return, or will you be back on the road?
It's a great question. Everyone asks me that, and I have to say I don't know, but knowing I think I've got another expedition at least in me.
There's more adventure, and
and also I feel like I'm very open to universal guidance, and I sort of feel a sense that I'm going to be guided to share more about this story in other parts of the world and be invited to speak about it. So I will travel for that reason as well.
Yeah. And what was the universal guidance that brought you back to the
UK? At first it was the end of a relationship that I'd been in for 5 years with a Polish woman. I met her in Thailand in 2014, and we connected really well. And to cut a long story short, you can read more in the book, but I moved to Warsaw in 2016 to live with her, to move into a home with her and make our relationship work. I had concerns and considerations about it, because we met, I was 54 and she was 32, and that was a huge generational gap. And I know it's not reason not to be in a relationship, but I said to her, I think you're a bit mad, want to be in a relationship with me because you want to have kids and I probably don't, blah blah blah. No, I don't want to have kids, she said, as she expected to say. I said, I think you're going to change your mind, and inevitably she did, etc., etc. And that wasn't the issue really, and it was just that there wasn't a strong enough relationship between us that would have made having kids work. I was quite open to that possibility, but it just didn't feel right. So that relationship ended, and then I was in Warsaw in Poland thinking, what am I doing here now? My purpose of being here is over. And I'm very purpose-led, so people often say, where are you going to live? I say, well, I'll know that when I know what the purpose is that I'm doing now. I'll find a place that's conducive to that purpose and will support me in that. And that's where I'll live, probably. So that's I decided to come back to the UK because my inner voice kept saying, go back, Ray. I know this is all a bit uncertain, but you need to go back to England and finish the book. That's all I want you to do. Just go and get the book written. Forget about everything else. Just get that out there. Yeah. And so that's what I did.
Nice. Yeah. And I'm going to come to coaching in a sec, listeners, if you're listening and you keep hearing me say that and we don't do it. But, you talk about that relationship there and the various relationships, including the divorce, but also other ones along the way are kind of real presences in the book. And throughout it, you're talking and writing about insights in those intimate relationships
Yeah.
and doing work to make them, I don't know what it would be, invite more success or the right energy in them. And I
Yeah.
wonder, it's quite a bold thing to write about those things, and
Yeah.
um, quite unusual to read about them, and so
Mm.
valuable, I think, for people.
Yeah.
Are there particular insights or reflections that you have on relationships that I don't know, what's the question, that really stand out for you, especially having done the reflection to then write about those
Yeah.
times?
I can mostly share what I learned to improve my own life. And so it's not necessarily insight that's universally applicable. But so, for example, one of the big things that shifted for me, because I started the journey with a woman called Annie, who I'd met in London. And that relationship was on for about a year and a half when we started, and then we broke up. We did get back together again, but we broke up at that point because what I saw in that relationship, partly because she gave me feedback about it and suggested I read a book called Undefended Love. She gave me this book and said, Ray, I think you need to read this. And I read this book, and it was all about how men in particular armor themselves up and become totally invulnerable to feedback and any kind of criticism, etc. And how having an open heart could lead to a lot more connection and fulfillment and satisfaction in relationships. And when I read the book, I had this feeling of embarrassment because every page I read, I thought, oh God, that's me. That's what I do. That's exactly where I'm at. I'm so stuck. I'm so defended. I'm so armored up. I'm so not open. Oh, it was horrible just reading it because I could see myself reflected in the pages. But it was enough to make me want to confront that part of myself, let's say, and do something about it. Because I thought, Anne is the first serious relationship I've had since I was married, and I'm just repeating the same pattern here. I don't want to do that anymore. I don't want to do that. I don't want to live my life. I've got 11,500 days or whatever it is. I don't want to live those days as that character. I need to make a character shift here. So I found the two women that wrote the book. I researched them online. I did this, but I had a Christmas on my own in Kathmandu, Nepal, where everyone had gone, and I was just in a room for a week on my own. So I did this research and found that they were running a workshop in San Francisco about how to tackle these issues and how to change. And I thought, wow, I'm in Kathmandu to San Francisco. It's going to cost me a fortune for a 2-day workshop. Can I justify spending all that money? I thought, oh, no, I probably can't. And I thought, no, hang on a minute. My brother works for British Airways. I'll call him and I'll see if this is a confirmation signal I'm meant to be on the workshop. I said, my brother's called Paul. I said, Paul, I'm reading about this workshop in San Francisco in about 5 months' time. Can you look up on the company system how much the hotline tickets are for staff, family members for a flight to San Francisco and back to London? Let's say do it from London. I'm just curious. I think it's going to be really expensive. How much is it? And he looked at it. He said, well, it's not bad. He said, I can get you there and back for like £60 plus taxes. I said, you're kidding. He said, no, that's because it's a low sort of volume season and the price is good. I said, okay, get me a ticket. I'm going to book myself on that workshop. That was my confirmation signal. It's only going to cost me £60 plus a few hours and days of travel, but I'm going. And I went to San Francisco and did that workshop, and I loved it. And it really started the process of me examining, exploring, and undoing some of that armor. But it wasn't enough, obviously, 2 days. And I said to the two women, what can I do to keep my journey of growth around this going? Because everyone here is just going to keep coming back for the weekends with you, and they live here. But I live in Asia. I can't come back. And they said, well, let's think about that. We'll get back to you. And they came back to me about a week or so later and said, the best thing we could advise you to do, Ray, is we think you should do something called the Hoffman process. And weirdly, that wasn't the first time I'd been given that advice. It was the second time. And I wrote about that in the book. And eventually, I did the Hoffman process. And that helped me really unravel those patterns. I've been a different version of me ever since, really.
And I think, is this right that you wrote this in the book, actually, so I know that it's right, but I think I thought it before. You're not allowed to tell us what happens in the Hoffman process, right? That's
yeah. I mean, the Hoffman process, it's extremely effective, partly because there's a surprise element in it. It's an 8-day journey. It's an 8-day intensive. You're in one place. You don't go outside. No phones, computers, anything. And so it's an 8-day intensive, and it works because you don't know what's coming. So none of us spoil it for anyone going into the next. But we can share something about it. And when I wrote about my experience of the Hoffman process, which I did at great length, and the vision that came out of it, when I showed that to the Hoffman Institute, primarily to check I wasn't stepping on their toes legally and I wasn't saying anything I'd be sued for, I checked everything like that in the book. They said, we're really glad that you've shown us this because we're very happy with what you've written. But not only that, we think it's probably one of the best accounts that anyone who's been through it has ever written. And so they published an article in their magazine to 10,000 members with my account of the process so that everyone could read it. And so they were really thrilled. And a couple of their members came to the book launch in London as well to give their support to me. So it was brilliant.
Amazing. And we should say as well, it's like, in a way, that's not surprising to me because alongside this, you've been practicing storytelling. Like, obviously, every time you met somebody new on the road, you were practicing, but also you've been writing blogs over many years during this time.
That to honor my guiding principle of connection. I thought the best way I can stay connected with the world is to write a blog, sharing what I'm learning and insights I'm having at every stage. So I started doing that, religiously.
And it's lovely. We can put a link to some of that in the show notes, and people can dive into different parts of the journey. And so, it's no surprise to me, given all that, that the book reads beautifully. And like, I said to you, I think I said this before we actually started speaking for guests, for people listening. It's like it's like I kept wanting to read more, right? It's a page thing. It's like, what's happening here and what's going to happen next for Ray, especially those, to have the inside from somebody who's so interested and so aware of the processes of growth and change. To be talking about that from the inside is a really, really beautiful thing to read.
It's one of the dreams I had. I love the story of Gandhi at the beginning. I won't spoil it for anyone who's not read the book.
It's a great story that people should look. People can get instant payoff in the book by getting that story on like page 6 or something.
The page 1 is page 1 of the introduction. Right. And it frames the book nicely because for me, when people say to me, "What's your definition of being a leader, Ray?" I change it sometimes, but often I'll say for me, it's always about going first and being the example, living it, just doing whatever it is you're going to say in words, but doing it yourself. And so I thought, what a great opportunity I've got to just live my life how I feel is the best way I can show up in the world, and then share the story of that and what happened to me as a result, and where that took me according to the values I've got, the beliefs I hold, and those things, which I had to examine deeply in order to know how to speak about it. So I'm really, it's always been something I've loved, to be leading by example is my joy in life. And as the best kind of leadership, I think, because we've all worked for people who say one thing and do completely the opposite. And we know how horrid that is.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, Ray, let's do the thing that I keep meaning to do and then getting distracted from, which is
coaching.
So how did you come back to coaching on this journey? For some of it, right, you were budgeting frugally and not working, and then for some of it you were working. And how did that come back, and why do you think it came back, that particular part?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I can answer that in a couple of steps. So 2005, I left, and I'd say for the first 3 years, I was purely fascinated with my life as a tourist, just visiting places, learning the history, seeing what was going on. For 2 or 3 years, that was really already a full life, just being a tourist. And then I noticed
let's just catch it, right? Like, you did that partly from being like a budget backpacker, right? Like really getting the daily expenditure down, and partly from some money you had from before that. Is that right?
Yeah, I was living on sort of 20 or 25 pounds a day,
Fantastic.
And did that for 2 or 3 years. And because that's not very much when you add it all up over a year, I had enough saved from my life in London and being a businessman that I didn't need to earn an income to cover those expenditures. I had enough already saved.
Yeah.
And it was 2005. Now in 2008, a couple of things happened that were crosshairs. One is I'd seen a couple of things on my travels that had really touched me deeply at the heart level. And I'd been I could see that I was ruminating on them in the back of my mind about how I could engage with those things, help support those things, etc. But in a very kind of distant way, I had been thinking about it, not in a serious way. But one was an elephant sanctuary in the north of Thailand where they were rescuing elephants and putting them back into the wild and giving them a loving, natural home. And a lady called Lek Chalet had really inspired me. She's an amazing, incredible woman. And she'd really made an impression on me and what they were doing. And they were doing it on a shoestring. And I thought, what could they do with more money? And then another one was an orphanage in Nepal where I'd gone and set up a picnic for 60 children at the orphanage on the invitation of a friend who'd volunteered there. She said, you must go there if you're in Nepal. And I did this picnic and I just saw these kids light up. And it was one of the best days of my life up to that point. I thought, what could we do if we had a bit more money, for these kids? What could we do? And I started thinking about that, but didn't do anything further. So that was 2008. And at the same time, the global financial crisis triggered off in Europe. And suddenly the money I had saved was vulnerable, to loss, depreciation, theft, confiscation, all sorts of bank collapse, so all of that was going on at the same time. And so I had to get some of the savings I had sort of into a more safe place and think about that. And I could see it also that triggered the collapse of interest rates on savings because the little amount I had invested was enough to cover some of the costs of my travel. But it was going to dry up. I could see that coming. So I thought, in a couple of years, I'm going to need to really seriously start building an income that I used to have before. And so I was aware of all those points. How can I be doing this support? How can I create money in the future? And so I started to pay attention to people I met on the travel who were connected somehow with the business world. Say, oh, what's your business then? What do you do? Just starting to see where I could hook myself to and find out about. And I came across things like, we do this licensed program that you can facilitate anywhere once you've been accredited. So I think I'd look into that and explore it and say, well, that costs £5,000 to get all the accreditations. And then I'd have to do a certain amount of work to recover that. No, that's not feeling right. No, I don't want to do that yet. Next thing. And I just started looking at lots of different things without making any decision or commitment. And in the meantime, I decided to commit to raising some funds for these causes. So I started my own online foundation. I called it the Calling All Angels Foundation, which is named after a movie I'd seen. And it was just me. And I thought, right, I'm gonna tap my network around the world of business contacts to get them to donate money. What would make them donate? What could I do? And while I was pondering that question, a guy called Matt Campbell, I met him randomly in my travels from England. And I said, what do you do when you're not working? He said, I'm a runner. I've run 6 marathons. I said, really? So tell me about running marathons. So he did. And I noticed the tingling of energy in my body when he was talking to me about that. I started noticing a lot more things like that. When someone spoke about certain things, they kind of triggered a kind of, ooh, like a sort of desire in me. And I noticed when that happened. And so I said, do you think I could run a marathon? He said, why are you asking? I said, because I'm trying to think of something I can do to raise money for these things. He looked at me and he said, well, you look quite fit. He said, have you ever run before? I said, no, never. I've not run, even 100 meters. He said, well, look, I'll tell you what. If you stay here for 6 months, I'll train you to run a marathon. If you do everything I say, you'll be ready. I said, okay, it's a deal. I'll do that. So I now had a coach who was going to train me to run a marathon, a purpose and a mission to do something good for somebody, which I didn't have as a tourist. And now I thought, wow, this is a new phase of this journey. I'm now a man on a mission. I'm going to train to run a marathon. I'm going to spend my nights and weekends raising money. And I'm going to have this big pot of money. I'm going to run a marathon. And Matt said, what marathon do you want to run? And I'd been to New York a couple of years before, and I'd watched the end of the New York Marathon. And I thought, I want to run the New York Marathon. That's the best one in the world. So Matt said, what are you going to apply for that? I said, well, I don't think I'll get a place. It's a ballot. He said, well, just give it a go, see what happens. So I entered the ballot. I got a place the first time. I knew that was a confirmation signal that was the right one because I got a place first time, no fuss. And so I then ran the New York Marathon in 2009 in November, 1st of November. raised $15,000, took the money back to Nepal and to the elephant sanctuary, deployed it, stayed there to get everything done. That project took me 18 months, literally full time, as if it was like a full-time job. But it gave me the experience of being engaged again with something which had targets and results, and like my business used to, but it obviously felt different. But it was different from being a tourist. I was now working and not being paid a penny, but actually with a schedule and with people to call and stuff like that. And I noticed I really liked it. I really loved it. I really loved that sense of being purpose-led and driven. I'd been okay for 3 years not having that, because it was nice to have a rest and a change. And that had altered my mindset a lot, that break. Just having no stimulus of any business type stuff had really changed how I thought about things in a good way. So when I came back to doing something meaningful, it felt different. It felt new, novel, energized. It felt different. And I was doing it for a purpose I loved. And so when that was over, I felt flat. I handed all the money out. I'd done the marathon. What's now? I thought, I'm really ready to re-engage with people in the business world, because that felt so different from my business life, but it was more like it. I wonder how I'd feel coaching people in the business world. How different would I be? Because I'm a different person myself. How would that feel? So I thought, I'm going to find a team I can align with to do some business coaching. Let's call it the universal guidance system. Let's set an intention. And this is one of the best stories in the book for how this system works, because I literally had no idea how I was going to do it. I didn't know a single business contact in the whole of Asia. I didn't know anybody. I didn't know the name of even one company, apart from the global ones, of course. So I went onto LinkedIn, which I was a member of, and I just typed in the words coaching Asia, and up came a load of people, profiles. I didn't know any of them. I sort of saw that most of them were coaches, and most of them belonged to a thing called APAC, the Asia Pacific Alliance of Coaches. I didn't know what that was. So I wrote to two of them, randomly picked, and said, I've just arrived in Asia. I'd like to do some part-time coaching work. Who do you think I should speak to? Who's the best person to connect with that could guide me in that right direction? And they both said, there's only one person you need to speak to. His name's Warapat. And this is him. I wrote this in the book. But actually, as a side note, I literally reconnected with Warapat yesterday, and I'm going to have a call with him in a couple of weeks.
Amazing.
So it's really nice. So I saw that guy, and before I went to see him, I thought, I best do, when you set an intention, as you'll know, when you tell coaching clients, first thing is you've got to be clear in your own mind and heart what it is you truly want to manifest. The clearer you are about that, the more specific you are with the universe and what you say to people, the more the spell you cast is going to manifest what you ask for. So I thought, what am I really looking for? And I wrote this down because it was embarrassing how, I knew what I wanted, but I felt I couldn't really be honest about it because people would laugh. Like, I wanted to work. This is the honest truth. I said, I want to work 20 hours a month, not a week, a month. That was really what I wanted. And people go, 20 hours a month? Who do you think you are, you lazy so-and-so? So, but that was the truth for me. I wanted to work 20 hours a month. I didn't want to travel to do the coaching, because in 2010, virtual was not a thing. It was only face-to-face. I thought, I've been Skyping my mum while I've been traveling. I want to coach Skype. I want to use Skype to coach clients. So I want to do it virtually from wherever I am. Got to find a way that's possible. And I'd actually been mentoring someone in the UK using Skype, so I knew it could work. And if I join a team of coaches, I don't want to feel any pressure, either actual or sort of implied, that I've got to join full-time or do more hours, that they're going to sort of somehow coax me in, gently. I don't want that. I would just want someone to say, Ray, we're really happy to have you 20 hours a month, and that's great with us. So that's fine. No pressure. And, it's got to be a good team to be in, and blah, blah, blah. So I told this to Warapat. I went through the embarrassment and said, I know this sounds pathetic, but this is really all I need and want. I just don't want to work because I've got these other things I want to do, like fundraising, writing, and stuff like that. So he said, I think I know one or two people that would be wanting to talk to you. Give me your profile. So that night in my hotel, I quickly made up a profile. I didn't actually have one. Sent it to him. And he sent it out, and a couple of days later, I got a call from a woman called Danielle in Singapore. She said, "Ray, I can't believe we've got your profile here for Morapat." She said, "I really want to speak to you because we're a successful coaching business from Europe that's been got lots of global clients, and we've just opened an office in Singapore, and so a lot of those global clients are wanting coach. We just don't have any coaches on the ground that are able to handle the level of coaching we have." She said, "If we could just get even 20 hours a month off you, it would be just oh, it'd be brilliant. Can we meet as soon as possible?" She said, "Oh, before you come," she said, "I've just got to tell you something. I don't know if you'll like it." I said, "What's that?" She said, "We're only going to do the coaching virtually." I said, "Really?" She said, "Yeah, we've decided for our business model, it's only going to work to do it virtually." I thought, "You're kidding me." I can't believe this. The power of intention, out of all the people in Asia, I found her in literally 3 steps with no effort. And I started working with Coach in the Box, as they were called then. I went to the induction training with them in September, and I started working in November of that year and worked coaching clients for them for about 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
It was just, that's how I started again. And then
It.
I found I really was in my element doing that, because it brought together everything that I'd learned from the whole of the journey so far up to that point, all the Buddhist training, all my business experience, my own leadership experience, everything came together in those coaching sessions for me. And I thought, wow, I like myself in this role. I really enjoy this.
Yeah. And we haven't really talked about the Buddhist training.
Yeah.
See if we have time for it. Otherwise, it might be a thing that people just have to wait till they read the book or find another interview with you or something like that.
Yeah.
So much in there.
Anyway, I know it's just a bit of a long-winded story, but just the power of intention is enormous.
It's really powerful. And it's, it's a sense, I think one of the things that the coaching industry has is it does have that possibility to create, to have that pattern that you were describing. No one really knew that. I don't know, like 10 years ago, that it would be a thing.
Yes.
I guess it was about then that you were kind of discovering that it can be virtual, and that can be very successful. And then so it can be all those things that you,
it's crazy now, isn't it? Because now everything's virtual. No one ever meets in real life.
Oh, especially after the last few years. And so then tell me, like, how does the coaching part of your work look now? I know there's other partnerships going on, and there's obviously the book may be forming part of that, and the kind of people that connect with you through that. But how does your coaching look now, and where do you think it might go in the future?
Well, I found 2 organizations that I feel like I align with very, very well at the values level and the mission level, And so I'm in 2 teams that I love being part of. And so I've been very lucky and fortunate in that sense. And so a lot of my coaching clients come through the association I have with those 2 organizations. And so that's working for everybody, for them, for me, and for the person being coached. So I think that will continue for a while because I love that work.
And how did you make the connections with those organizations? That's the kind of, especially for new coaches, I think that they know a lot of people, and for some people, it's like a perfect relationship where everybody is gaining so much, but it can feel quite hard to know how to find that connection and find the right organization. So how did they come about for you?
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. It's similar to everything I've said so far, so you won't be surprised.
I know. I know some of the story of the Ivy House one. I read that in the book. And it's great. And actually, you probably know we've had Robert Stevenson on the show who does some work with Ivy House.
He does indeed.
Remember that, but yeah. Give us the kind of universal guidance flavor of how these came about.
In the 6 rules for happiness that I wrote at the end of my book, one of the rules that's led to happiness in my life that I've followed is build sustainable, powerful, supportive relationships. If you are intent on doing that all of the time and you create significance in all the working relationships you have, you will always find a way to, find the next thing that you're looking for, because you'll have people out in the world in your network supporting you. And that's what happened to me when I met Dorota and moved to Poland from Thailand. I thought, I'm moving to Poland. That's a higher cost of living. I don't have any savings, or not as much as I had. I'm going to need to get a sort of fairly serious income living there. I better start reaching out to people that I know. And so I contacted somebody that I had worked with at First Place and said, "How are you doing?" And she said, "We're
First
we're
place was your
yeah,
company, right?
yeah, that's
I don't
right.
think we
Yeah,
said that.
that was my business. Yeah." And she said, "Well, I'm about to launch a business with someone, and it's called Ivy House." And she described it, and we'd worked together for 6 years. And what was great about her in particular, that it was her that I was speaking to, is that when I saw the end at First Place coming, I'd helped her find a job that she could shift into so she would be safe. And I had no obligation to do it. I didn't get a penny for doing it, but it just felt like the right thing to do for me because I really cared about her as a human being. And I just really wanted her to be safe. And so she landed in a similar job with a rival company and she was sorted. And it was someone from that rival company and her were now starting this new business. And so I said, "Wow, that sounds really interesting." I said, "Yeah, it's interesting timing because I'm now back in Europe. I was thinking about how I might start working again in Europe. I'd love to be one of the coaches on the team." She said, "Right, okay, you're in." So that's how that happened.
I love it. And it is this kind of really frustrating thing and true thing that has been kind of true in my business as well, life as well, right? That,
Yeah,
you know, form strong, meaningful relationships,
yeah,
and that tends to lead to good things. And
yeah.
unfortunately, you can't like predict exactly when this particular person that you looked after really well
No,
because you cared there's gonna be a thing, and you don't know that it's gonna be her, but it's a meaningful thing to do. And it does tend to mean
yeah,
that there are these moments where, here's an opportunity which comes because of those relationships.
yeah. I mean, I hate gardening metaphors because they're so cliched. But if you plant the seeds in every relationship, the flowers bloom over different periods. Some take a couple of months, some take a year to flower, but they all will eventually, somehow yield something. And sometimes they don't because you don't need them. So, um, but it's always worked for me. It's
Mm.
always worked for me to call on. I asked loads of people for help when I was doing the fundraising, and people seemed that they wanted to help me because I'd been in service to them in different ways before. So I was sort of, aware. I was aware of that. I was aware I'd provided good service, and so I was not ashamed to ask for help. Um, and I wasn't in this case. Claire actually said to me, "Oh, that would be interesting because you were my boss for 6 years. Now I'm going to be your boss. And how would you feel about that?" I said, "I don't mind. I've got no pride about that. I really don't mind at all. I'm really, really happy to be in service to your mission and support you to have that come about because I believe in it too."
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that's the thing. I think I'm lucky that I can choose things where obviously it's a monetary exchange because everyone needs to pay their bills, but that for me is often the least important part. As long as that's in the right ballpark, I'm happy. But it's more like, is there energy? Is there alignment? Will it feel nice to work? Because I've only got now 6,400 days left.
Mm.
And I'm not going to work all of those. I'm not going to work maybe half of those or maybe even a quarter of those even. So I'm going, I want to just work with people I love working with. That's now much more important than how much the pay is, but if the pay is important too.
Yeah. And if you look forward with your coaching work, with the book, with the partnerships and the relationships and the people you're working with and all those things, what are you excited about in the next, as you look forward?
Oh, lots of things. I mean, one is what's emerging now is because I'm only just starting to talk to people who've actually read the book.
Mm.
It's a long book, so it probably takes most people 2 or 3 months at least. And it only went on sale 2 or 3 months ago. So what's emerging are little tiny shoots of thinking. Like I decided to not have, all the conventional wisdom was if you're going to write a book, you better have all your products ready, all your stuff rolled out, get it all packaged up. You've got to do your social media, all that stuff. It just didn't feel like that for me. I felt a kind of, I don't know, repulsion to that way of doing it. I thought, you know what I want to do? I just want to write a story, get it out into the world, and then talk to people who've read it and say, what most resonated for you? What do you need? What service would you need if this was going to be applied in your life? How could I do that usefully for you? And just see what emerges. Because some people might say, I want some one-on-one time with you, or I want to attend a workshop. Are you organizing any? Or I want to do something like this or that. I'll just wait and see and talk to people. I'm in that stage now. I'm talking to people. So I'm not sure what will emerge exactly, but what will emerge will be what people really want and need, because it will come from them. And I'll provide service if I can. So
it's a lovely little call back to the conversation about sales we had near the
yeah,
start of the conversations, right? It's like, well, I'm
yeah,
going to find out now. What are the people
yeah,
who have loved this enough to speak to me, who it's been meaningful
yeah,
enough to have another conversation? What do they need? And then
yeah.
what can I provide something that meets that need?
Yeah, like, and one thing that's emerging slightly is because when I was I was in my mid-40s when I got divorced, and so I've had a couple of conversations with men around that age, around 50ish, who have quite in confidence admitted, they're struggling a bit in their relationships and
Yeah, there's a
life.
great bit in your book, which is, as a man who's had a birthday recently, he's getting remarkably close to 40,
Yeah,
worryingly close. There's this thing you say about an author I'd never heard of, Steve Biddulph,
yeah,
and the challenges men face in the modern world, and the idea of a sabbatical at 40.
yeah,
I like the idea of a sabbatical at 40. That sounds fun.
yeah,
Start thinking about that. But yeah, I can
yeah,
imagine that reading your book, that
yeah,
one of the group of people it will really speak to is that group of people in some version of that acting
yeah.
life that you were in before you kind of had no choice but
Right.
to look at it and work out what the hell was going on.
Exactly. So I've had a chat with one or two of those guys just to sort of tap into what would be valuable for you, because I'm not a relationship counselor. That's not my training. I'm not. I'm just a guy who's had a life of a story of my own with some insight from it. But it's so I'm not quite sure. I mean, and then I'm meeting people along the way who I never would have noticed before. Like, I found this guy in America at one of the big universities who's led this thing called the Sabbaticals Project, and he's become a sort of almost like an authority on the whole issue of sabbaticals and how they're shaped. And I thought, do you know what? I'd love to collaborate with him. So I reached out and said, I'd love to collaborate with you. I have no idea how or what, but I just think my journey somehow is very close to what you're doing. So we're going to have a conversation about that. So I don't know. But I mean, you see, one of the things I learned on my journey, and not just through the journey, but through books I'd read. I don't know if you've ever come across a book called The Untethered Soul by Michael Singer.
I know of it actually, now you say it, but I haven't read it.
It's one of my favorite books of all time. I think I've read it 4 times because he describes what it's like to live your life in surrender. Because there's like 2 systems. You either push yourself into the world and go, my plan and goal is this, and I'm going to push to make this happen. And it's got to happen exactly as I've specified it. Otherwise, I'm not going to be happy. And so you're pushing everything else out of the way to focus on this goal that you, and it worked for me as a businessman because we drove a business to financial targets. And I'm not saying that's bad and don't do it. There are certain ways that is the right way, sometimes. And there's another system where you go, I'm just going to flow in the river of life and be guided and directed. And so if I get guided down this channel, that's great. If I get guided down this middle channel, fine. And if I get guided down this one on the other side, that's fine too. So whatever happens, I'll be happy. And that takes a lot of the pressure off. So this is why I'm exploring it from this angle, because I love the coaching work I do currently. If I had to do that for the next 2,000 days, I'd be very happy doing that. And I could explore other things I could do. And if I decide to do some of that, I'd be happy doing that, and a mixture of the two. So I feel like I can't lose because everything feels like it's a good possibility, and I'm not attached to any of them. So
yeah, it's lovely. And maybe the answer to this next question is that, right? But you talked earlier about leadership being about kind of doing the thing first, right? Leading by example. And
not all, that's one. I think that's one part of it, not the whole part of it.
Yeah, but an important part in lots of, in my view, in lots of areries of life, right? Again, like I said, I've got a 2-year-old, so I'm thinking a lot about what leadership as parenting is, and it's this terrible thing that she does what we do, right? And she always will, to some extent, not what we say. And so it's a high level of responsibility, just like it is as a leader. And like you said, there's kind of almost nothing worse for some of us. Maybe it's just me as another person with a high integrity value, to have a leader who says one thing and does the other, or asks one thing of people and does something completely different. It's kind of painful experience. But I wonder, the journey that you've been on, the book, the work you do with people, the conversations you might have, I know it's emerging and I know there's a surrender element to it, but if you look back on the journey maybe and look back on the book and the reflection you've done on yourself there, what are the things that you're proud to be living that might be leadership by example for the right people?
Mm. Yeah. I mean, what I've sort of learned, I suppose, is how to serve people who are. I, I had to encapsulate some of these things for a publicist in America, funnily enough. She said, if I'm going to talk to people about promoting your book, I need to understand some of the things you speak about or talk to. So things like, what's it like to be trapped in a life that others expect of you? I feel like I've gathered a lot of knowledge and understanding of that and can talk to anyone who's in that situation and look at that from a very creative and different point of view. So that would be an example. Other things like, how do you live your life in a way that you're going to die without regrets? How's that going to play into the picture of how you decide, make decisions?
Yeah.
How do you avoid the pressure to conform? So you're just doing things because that's what everyone does, but it's not what makes your heart sing. And how do you handle the disapproval and the opinions and judgments of all your family and friends? So these are the things I've experienced a lot in my life, not just from this journey, but I was like that even before. So I had to deal with a lot of that disapproval and judgment.
Mm. Yeah. I mean, each of those, Ray, and probably more, we could spend another 2 hours
Yeah, I've
talking
got
about.
sort of 12 more, there's
Yeah,
loads.
and I wish there'd been a chance to talk about Thich Nhat Hanh and the
Yeah.
Buddhism and all those kind of things too. But we're almost at time, and I guess I'm wondering. I mean, there is time now. If there's people listening, whether they're coaches or otherwise, is there anything that you want to say to bring the conversation to a close, or anything that we haven't talked about that you want to
Oh,
take a minute or two to just slow down on?
yeah, wow. Such a great question. It's hard to choose one thing, but since we didn't
You can
touch
have
on
a
it, yeah.
few.
No, since we didn't touch on it, I'd say, for me, the most valuable work any person can do, myself, I'm saying this to myself, is the continued and ongoing job of getting greater self-awareness. That's it. That's the work.
Yeah.
So you don't have to do it. The great thing is you don't have to change the world outside. I think it's that lovely quote by Marcel Proust. I don't know the exact quote, but he's the guy who said something like, "You only have to change the world. You just have to see things through new eyes. You don't need to change anything outside." Something like
Yeah.
that.
And that's the thing,
And
like as coaches,
yeah,
that's the opportunity in every conversation,
yeah,
isn't it?
that's it.
That we
That's
can
it.
do that.
Because once you have that possibility, the way things look changes from how you look at them. Because everything we see and judge is through an opinion or a belief that we're holding. So it's a filtered perception. And if you can understand that basic mechanism and you can sidestep it, you can override it.
Yeah. Well, and it's that like not realizing we're the character, not
Yeah,
realizing we're playing a character the whole time. It's
yeah,
like as soon as you can see that, it's like, oh wait, all of this stuff. Yeah, what a thing.
yeah.
And it
We know we must be a character because there's dramas going on in our lives. Characters and drama go together.
yeah, and farce and
Yeah,
farce.
all of it, all of it. Yeah, EastEnders.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean it's obvious, in some ways, Ray, that it's a lovely thing that emerged from you there about self-awareness, because that does feel like it's been one of the in the way you've told the story today, the themes of your life, right? Because it was there
Yeah,
in the playground, and it was there in the
yeah.
self-awareness group with Robert, and it's gone on and on since then. So look, thanks for sharing some of that journey with us on this show and in the book. And yeah, it's been a total pleasure to touch into it and just get
Right.
even that flavor. So thanks so much for being with us.
My pleasure, Robbie.